Hello and welcome to Connotation Points video Snark. I'm making my way through Fallen by Lauren Kate. If you haven't seen the other videos, you might want to do that before jumping into this one, or else you might be confused. Links will be posted below. Chapter 2. I'm going to start this video off by jumping right into a quote. A half-empty notebook she started to fill at Dover in her advanced European history class last year. I know that there's bound to be a difference in Lucy's education simply because she did go to a prep school. However, I feel like she's already setting herself up for disappointment by specifically name-dropping classes that she'd been in at her old school. They all stood clustered near the windows, taking one last drag of a cigarette here, repositioning the extra-large safety pins on their t-shirts there. Again, going off of the idea that the author doesn't seem to know much about how reform schools and most of this series is going to be nothing about, think of the drama! Underage smoking at a reform school, allowing objects that could be used to hurt yourself like safety pins. Does Lauren Kate even know what a reform school is? Anyway, Luce follows the others into a classroom which is described as being haphazard and in disarray. The teacher isn't there yet, so most of the students stand around and do aforementioned underage smoking and talk. Luce follows suit with the only other student who is sitting and takes a seat herself. Marianne briefly talks to some of the others before she talks to Cam, the boy who'd come in with Luce. He then turns his attention to Luce and says that newbies have to stick together and tries to defend himself against whatever Ariane might have told Luce when the girls were alone. However, Luce is quick to say that Ariane never said anything to her about Cam. Cam seems to think that Ariane has an agenda in regards to showing new kids around. Cam then pulls his desk closer to Luce's and gives her a guitar pick with his room number on it while saying that she can stop by any time, because apparently he thinks that Luce is too stupid not to remember a two-digit number or something. Luce tells herself that she usually doesn't get involved with rockers, but at the same time she also notes that the pick is about the color of his eyes. Ariane then comes over and says that she's already called dibs on Luce. Cam and Ariane start to fight over Luce, and Luce is just so weirded out by this and decides not to say anything since she doesn't really know how things are supposed to be here. The warning bell for class rings and the other students finally take their seats. Luce finds herself watching the door for Daniel to come in. She also can't help but note that Cam is watching her too. She had been at the school for 45 minutes, and her mind was already juggling two different guys. Love triangle should go die a horrible death. But she has to remind herself that she's only at this school because of a guy. Well, why do I get the feeling that there's a lot more to it than her interest in the other guy? But this is what Luce thinks, so we've just got to go with it. The book spends another moment hammering in how hot Cam is. Luce then decides that she can be friends with Cam and maybe she won't feel so out of place if she actually makes friends. And this thought immediately leads her down a rabbit hole of, what if I could just forget about all of the bad things about this place that ranges from things like the poorly maintained buildings to the other children. The teacher comes in and Luce is weirdly disappointed by Daniel not being there. Well, the book doesn't call it weird, but I do. Why is she so obsessed with this guy? Like, he's hot, but she literally just finished reminding herself that she doesn't want to do a romance right now. Cam throws a paper airplane at her that chides her for glancing towards the door and saying that they'll be stuck in the same room until lunch. The teacher, Mr. Cole, gives the new students a syllabus. As Luce reads hers over, she feels like it's unfair what with tests and huge essays due seemingly every other day. Luce then tries to make her own paper airplane to send back to Cam, but before she can fold one, he sends her another airplane and warns her not to risk throwing it. The teacher chides them to stop passing notes and reminds them not to cheat off of the others. Later, Luce complains to Ariane about how dry and depressing that their morning block classes were. Ariane seems to think that Mr. Cole always puts on a tough face for the new kids, but lightens up after a while. As they're going to the cafeteria, Cam bumps into Luce's shoulder in a way that seems a bit too convenient in Luce's opinion. Ariane silently encourages Luce to say something to him, but then she doesn't. In the cafeteria, Ariane then tells Luce which dishes to avoid and which are somewhat okay. However, Luce says that she's a vegetarian because she doesn't like meat. And I don't have a problem with Luce being a vegetarian, but I'm gonna get angry if the book starts to get all preachy on us. Ariane then points towards where Daniel is sitting. Now, does that go for all meat? Ariane's saying loudly, like you wouldn't sink your teeth into him. I had to read this and so do you. Luce is just embarrassed that Ariane had said it loudly enough for Daniel to have heard. As they stand in the line, Luce also thinks about this weird pull that she has towards him, and the book takes a moment to reinforce how hot that Daniel is. Ariane insists that Daniel is so focused on his food that he didn't notice, but Luce isn't convinced. To make matters worse, Roland makes a suggestive eyebrow wiggle at her. Luce then takes half a step back, crashes into somebody who pushes her from behind. Luce crashes into the person in front of her and takes down their tray. Ah, yes, the standard clumsy new girl trope, which is not only tired but also cringy as anything. And obviously, this is an excuse to introduce the mean girl du jour, Molly. She demands that Luce apologize and buy her a new lunch, but then she steps on Luce with her high-heeled shoe to prevent Luce from getting up. Molly then makes a pass at Ariane, saying how the other girl is supposed to be on probation. Ariane then slugs Molly, and then is seemingly electrocuted from the tracking monitor that she's wearing. Which, how exactly is that thing triggered? Are the people in the video monitoring room watching all of this and pressed Ariane's button? Furthermore, how exactly is a tiny little bracelet able to send what I assume to be a girl of average height, if not below average weight, into a complete body convulsion? Again, all of this seems to be thrown in for the sake of drama. Then Randy, the lady who'd given them the tour earlier, shows up and tells them to break it up. She then gives all three of them detention the next morning, even though Luce didn't do anything except to trip and be shoved around a lot. But adults being unfair, I guess. Ugh. The second that Randy leaves with the still convulsing Ariane to get her tracking bracelet turned off, Molly slams her tray into Luce's head. I continue to have questions about those tracking bracelets, but I don't think that they'll ever be answered. Molly makes a joke about the meatloaf on Luce's head and snaps a picture. Luce then half turns and sees an irritated look on Daniel's face. She's determined not to cry in front of everybody on her first day and runs out, only she's annoyed with the thick air she finds outside. She somehow makes it to the parking lot, and how is beyond me, but whatever. There she wants to find her car and sit in it, but obviously it's not there. She realizes then that this is absolute rock bottom for her. Since she's still covered in Molly's lunch, she goes to the nearest bathroom where she runs into Gabby. The girl doesn't seem to know what happened to Luce, but Luce seems to think that Gabby is playing dumb to make her feel better. Luce rejects Gabby's offer of makeup and Gabby just leaves. Luce is trying to clean herself up, not quite knowing how it is that she'll do it. Food is smeared all over her hair and clothes. A girl that hasn't been introduced yet comes in. She makes a thin joke about needing a hall pass, but then quickly laughs it off. She says that she got some shampoo for Luce and says that she'll help Luce get cleaned up. She also pulls off one of her multiple sweaters to offer to Luce and says that she wears a lot of things because she has a poor immune system. Luce naturally asks why the girl is being so nice to her. The girl makes a crass joke about some of the things that people call the kids at the school based off of the name Sword and Cross. I won't say it because it's stupid and vulgar, but you can probably take some guesses. But she goes on to say that most of the people at the school aren't that bad, but the few who are give everybody else a bad name. The girl friendly introduces herself as Pennyweather von Sickle Lockwood, and Nope. She goes by Pen. We also get a full name for Luce, Lucinda Price. Pen says that she read Luce's file, which she does as a hobby. Penn then says that she's not there because the court sent her, and it said she's the only one there that the staff trusts to help in the office, so she has access to the files if she wants to. But then she explains that it's not like she wanted to go to the school, but her father works there, and it's like, is there literally nowhere else for Penn to go? Not one single high school? But then she says, in response to Luce's unasked question about the unmaintained grounds, that her father died 2 years ago, and the headmaster became her legal guardian, and nobody's bothered to hire a replacement groundskeeper in the 2 years since. But the main reason why she can't leave is more of an emotional attachment to her dead dad, which I get that it stinks to be an orphan and this is the only place that you've ever known, but come on, you could have a pretty normal life. Instead, she hangs out with criminals all day long and will have to explain for the rest of her life why she graduated from a reform school. And then Penn makes a comment about Molly's mental state and needing to change her meds around because, other people's mental illnesses are so funny. This book. I'm not sorry for saying that. Luce is just impressed that Penn seems to know what's going on at the school, but she hesitates in asking about Daniel. At least Luce has enough common sense about that. Penn then finishes with Luce's hair. She makes a mention of Luce's file photo having long hair and saying that it would have been difficult if Luce's hair had still been that long. And apparently they can't even get a recent photo for the school files. Penn says that she and Luce are in the afternoon block together. She says that she's a good friend to have. Chapter 3. As Luce goes to her room, she notes that a lot of the doors are closed. She thinks about her old school, how she always wished for more privacy. From somebody down her hall throwing a party, to girls gossiping, to a couple making out in the middle of the hall. I feel like Luce is going to be wishing for some more privacy soon enough, just in a really different way than she's used to. She also notes that the students decorate their rooms in order to make up for the strict dress code at the school. A beaded curtain is mentioned along with the motion sensor doormat. I honestly have no idea why the school would allow all of that. The school is supposed to be a punishment. What's so punishing if you're allowed to have nice things like that? Luce gets to her room, which even has a lock that needs a key, which you'd think that they wouldn't allow because it means that a student could lock themselves in the room and harm themselves with any of the dozens of harmful things that the book has mentioned in 3 chapters alone. But Luce doesn't find the room to be nearly half as bad as she'd been afraid of it being. It's got a window that opens up a little and a full-length mirror on the back of the door. Said mirror is used to describe what Luce looks like, which longtime fans of mine will know is one of my most detested tropes. Literally, nobody looks at themselves in the mirror and goes, "My, look at how hazel that my eyes are, and my hair." Well, I'll give the book half a point because Luce notes that she looks exhausted, and in Penn's sweater she looks really awful. Luce also feels bad because in the second half of classes that day, everybody had taken to calling her Meatloaf. And this is where you start breaking out some of Meatloaf's greatest hits. Is that somebody that the kids these days even know about? I'm just going to go now. Luce tries to unpack to make her bedroom seem more like a safe space for her, but she stops before she even gets started and instead just lets her misery wash over her. She thinks about the 30-minute ride that she and her parents had taken to the school that morning. She thinks about how much she misses weird things like her dad's tomato plants. And then she starts to think about her relationship with Trevor, except they were never really in a relationship. They talked briefly, like once. Their only date was literally the hour before whatever bad thing happened to Trevor. They went down to the lake by the cabin, they'd kissed, and then his eyes had turned white with terror. Something about these shadows that Luce can't stop seeing everywhere. Luce is interrupted from her self-induced misery by somebody knocking on her door, except when she opens it, there's nobody out there. However, there is another airplane tacked onto the board by the door. Oh, so they have freaking personal bulletin boards now too? The paper only has an arrow pointing down the hall, and since she isn't doing anything except wallowing in pity, she decides to go. Luce walks down the hall a bit and stops in front of one door. She realizes that it belongs to Roland and thinks that maybe Daniel is hanging out with him. But then she realizes that Ariane's room is directly across from Roland's. She describes the door as being so covered in bumper stickers that they're all overlapping, and that most of them contradict themselves too. There's another note for Luce on Ariane's bulletin board. This one is an apology since they had agreed to hang out after school was over. But following Ariane being shocked, she needed to spend time in the nurse's office and then to make up for her missed classes. Luce stands there, and while she's grateful that Ariane is being taken care of, she feels awkward and alone now. Roland pokes his head out from his room after a moment and asks what it is that she's doing. She says that she came to see Ariane, and then she seems to scramble and say the next excuse that pops into her head just to get out of the awkward situation. She needs to go to the library. Roland tells her where it is and tells her a specific spot in the library to take a look at. When Luce gets to the library, she instantly starts to feel better. She even notes that even the toughest looking kids don't look so bad when they're bent over books studying. She meets the librarian, Miss Sophia, who directs her to the area Roland had told her about. As Luce goes, she sees another one of those shadows, but it passes quickly, much to her relief. And then she sees Daniel sitting in that area. He seems to be drawing, and for some unholy reason Luce seems to have this idea that he's drawing her, and she needs to find out what it is that he's actually drawing. However, at least Luce acknowledges that her obsession with Daniel is a bit weird considering that they've never actually spoken before. Luce then remembers a dream that she'd had the night before of her standing before curtains while wearing something strange. There had been somebody who was drawing her, but she'd never gotten a good look at his face. And of course she's having plot-relevant dreams, except that this is probably going to turn out to be not a dream, isn't it? And then another shadow appears, and she does something that draws Daniel's attention, but he naturally doesn't react to the shadow, because she's the only one who can see them. Luce then looks at the sketchbook over Daniel's shoulder, and for a brief moment there is a figure drawing, but then as she blinks, she realizes that it's a landscape of the cemetery outside. How do you mix the two of them up? Daniel asks what it is that she's doing, and she gives the excuse that she's there to check out a book. Daniel is like, okay, bye. But then he asks if she enjoys having other people sneak up on her and says that since she's agreed that it's awful, that maybe she should be more considerate of sneaking up on others in the future. He then says that since she's not going to leave, then he will. However, as he goes to leave, their shoulders brush and a static charge passes through them. Been shuffling on the carpet in your socks again, have you? But the shock makes both of them still for a second, and then Daniel leaves. And so far, I'm also struggling to hate this book. A lot of the reasons why it is that I'm not finding this book fun is mostly because of the way that the narration is treating mental illnesses and needing to take medication. Also, I keep bringing this up, but it's bothering me so much, but these students can't have things like cell phones and only get to make one call a week, but for some unholy reason, they get to have cigarettes and they can paint their dorm rooms. I'm mainly just waiting for the actual plot to begin. Hopefully it actually will, and it won't just be 300 plus pages of nonsense. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be here next Monday. Don't forget to check out my other video Snark series. If you're new here, then I also run a Tumblr where I post daily book snarks. I also have a Patreon where I post early releases of my daily snark, but also bonus snark that isn't up anywhere else. Plus, all supporters get a big shout out. Thank you so much to Dawn and Phoebe for supporting me already. You can hear your name next week by joining my Patreon for $1 a month. However, since it is a recurring charge, I also accept PayPal and coffee. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I've published, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have 17 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for all of these things will be posted below. See you next week, guys.